Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're going to unravel the grand illusion of the multi-billion-dollar art market, and honestly, it is fascinating. We'll look at how the ultra-rich use canvas and paint to perform what is essentially the ultimate financial magic trick. If you've ever walked through a modern art gallery and felt like you were completely missing something, well, it turns out you're not alone. The secret isn't necessarily in the brushstrokes. It's in the balance sheets.
So, let's just address the giant stainless steel rabbit in the room right out of the gate. Why on earth would a billionaire drop $43 million on a sculpture that literally looks like a balloon animal from a novelty shop? To the average person, dropping 8 figures on something like this seems like an absurd display of excess. But what if I told you that exorbitant price tag might actually be the exact thing that makes a billionaire's tax bill completely vanish?
The real trick here is a total shift in perspective. You and I, we look at art for its aesthetic value, or, simply as decoration for our walls. But the 0.01%, alongside major financial institutions, view it as a highly sophisticated asset class. It operates completely outside the tightly regulated banking system, its value is entirely subjective, and as we're going to see, it offers opportunities that a standard stock portfolio simply can't touch. It is a perfectly legal, highly tuned vehicle for wealth preservation and cash flow.
To really understand this, we're going to treat this explainer like the blueprint of a heist. We're mapping out the billionaire's playbook step by step. We'll cover 1. The true value of art. 2. The secret storage vaults. 3. The ultimate tax loophole. 4. Borrowing against beauty. And finally, 5. The rigged market. Let's get into it.
Section 1. The true value of art.
Check this out. Investing in art is not some modern fad. It has deep historical roots. Look at the data from legendary economist John Maynard Keynes. Researchers at the University of Cambridge tracked his actual buy-and-hold art portfolio from 1917 to the present day, and his personal collection yielded an extraordinary 10.4% return. That actually rivaled the UK equity markets. His collection didn't just look pretty on a wall, it vastly outperformed government bonds and matched the stock market. It proved very early on that art, when purchased strategically, is an absolute powerhouse for wealth generation.
To put that into perspective today, ultra-high net worth individuals park about 4% of their massive portfolios directly into art. They are drawn in by this history of massive, idiosyncratic returns that operate almost entirely outside standard economic crises. When traditional markets crash, a Picasso or a Rothko often holds its ground. Economists actually call this an investment of passion that pays an aesthetic dividend, which is basically a fancy way of saying you get to enjoy looking at a masterpiece while it quietly anchors your wealth.
Section 2. The secret storage vaults.
If you want to know where this wealth is actually hidden, you've got to understand freeports. Take the notorious Geneva Freeport, for example, which currently holds an estimated $100 billion in art safely hidden from the world. Originally, these places were just designed for temporarily holding grain or manufactured goods, but today, they are high-tech luxury fortresses. And because the items inside are legally considered to be in transit, they technically never enter the customs territory of any country.
Inside these ultra-secure concrete bunkers, ownership of a masterpiece can change hands between anonymous shell companies 10 times over, without the physical painting ever moving an inch, and more importantly, without triggering a single tax bill. There are no import duties, no value-added tax. A billionaire in New York can sell a painting to an oligarch in Russia, the money changes hands in offshore accounts, the title transfers, but the painting itself, it just stays in the exact same climate-controlled crate in Switzerland.
Section 3. The ultimate tax loophole.
Now we arrive at the real prestige of our magic trick. Before a charitable donation even happens, wealthy collectors rely on estate planning mechanisms like the step-up in basis. This ensures that dynastic wealth is transferred completely tax-free upon death. Think about it. If you buy a painting for $1 million and it appreciates to $50 million, selling it while you're alive triggers a massive capital gains tax. But if you just wait until you pass away, the tax basis steps up to that current $50 million fair market value. Your heirs can then sell it completely tax-free. It is a staggering wealth transfer mechanism.
But what about when they're still alive? To show you how the living dodge taxes, let's look at the hypothetical case of a hedge fund wizard. Let's call him Bob. Bob manages to save an astonishing $1.85 million in federal taxes without ever really losing access to his art. This is where the mechanics of charitable giving are brilliantly exploited to offset income tax.
Here's the actual sleight of hand, step by step. Bob buys a painting low, say for $1 million. He then gets an inflated appraisal valuing it at $5 million. He takes that art and donates it to his very own private museum, one that conveniently has incredibly restrictive hours. And boom, he reaps a massive tax deduction while his family effectively still controls the painting. Because he technically donated it to a registered charity, Bob gets to write off the current appraised value, not what he originally paid for it. He essentially turns a $1 million purchase into nearly $2 million of absolute tax savings. And the crazy part? The public effectively just subsidized his private collection.
Section 4. Borrowing against beauty. So what happens if our billionaires need some actual liquid cash to, say, buy another mega yacht or invest in commercial real estate? If they sell their art, they trigger taxes, right? Enter collateralized lending. They tap institutions like Sotheby's Financial Services or JP Morgan to access the equity in their art collections. Just like you might take out a home equity line of credit, the ultra-rich literally use their Picassos as collateral for cash loans. And the real beauty of this debt? Borrowed money is not classified as taxable income.
Now, the loan-to-value ratio for art is a bit lower than your standard real estate mortgage, hovering right around 50%. But the billionaire still gets millions in tax-free cash, while their painting appreciates quietly in a free port somewhere. These are often term loans lasting 2 to 3 years, requiring zero periodic payments until the very end. It allows a collector to keep their wealth invested, defer capital gains, and still get their hands on massive amounts of liquidity to fund their lifestyle.
Section 5. The rigged market.
Finally, we have to examine the dark underbelly of how this entire market is kept opaque and artificially inflated. The market's absolute lack of transparency allows for massive money laundering and sanctions evasion. Take Roman Abramovich, for example, who successfully transferred a $1 billion art collection to his ex-wife through offshore trusts just weeks before the Ukraine invasion. Because the art world relies heavily on intermediaries, shell companies, and intense privacy, true owners hide in plain sight. It makes it incredibly difficult for regulatory authorities to track illicit funds or enforce any international sanctions.
And this game is fiercely protected. Auction houses manufacture artificially high benchmarks for appraisers, and powerful lobbying groups spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in Washington to kill any reform bills, usually by claiming they attack culture. The IRS advisory panel only has the resources to review a tiny fraction of art donations. Meanwhile, auction houses guarantee minimum prices to inflate market caps, creating this endless feedback loop of skyrocketing values. Any attempt to require these private, tax-exempt museums to actually be open to the public more often is swiftly lobbied right out of existence.
But here is the absolute kicker. As our sources point out, none of this is actually illegal. It is a meticulously crafted gray area, fully supported by a tax code designed to let the ultra-rich hoard wealth while pretending to be philanthropists. Tax courts have routinely affirmed that a tax avoidance motive doesn't invalidate a charitable deduction as long as the paperwork technically complies with the statute. It's an extraordinary system where philanthropy and highly aggressive tax strategy become completely indistinguishable.
Because think about it, every single dollar funneled through this loophole is a dollar cut from public services. It leaves us with one major question. When a billionaire buys a metal rabbit, aren't the taxpayers the ones actually footing the bill? We are literally subsidizing the collections of the wealthiest people on the planet. I hope this explainer helped decode the true financial power of a painted canvas. Take a look at the world around you, because once you see the blueprint, you really can't unsee the heist.